Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, things are fine. Body's breaking down. Still drawing trees. Work is work. Whatever. Anyway, I've been reading John le Carré's memoir, The Pigeon Tunnel, lately, and it's a blast. It's got a bazillion anecdotes from his days researching his novels, where his travels took him all over the world. His literary reputation got him entree with all sorts of, we'll say, interesting people. And he's a natural storyteller, so, recounting these things, it's pretty illuminating. One of the anecdotes that kind of plays into this week's show is when he interviewed a Russian gangster in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union and the criminals started taking over the country. The scene is a nightclub, pounding music, and le Carré is working through an interpreter, and he asks the gangster whether, he describes the robber barons in the U.S. and the ridiculous wealth those guys made, but how, as they started thinking about their children and grandchildren, they all started working towards building legacies like universities, public libraries, things like that, things that weren't wealth for the sake of wealth. And did this guy think about that, what he would do in 15 years, looking at mortality and legacy and whether he'd try and do something good? And the gangster just basically told him to get the fuck out. Like, he had no thought whatsoever of anything besides making money and staying on top, which, is understandable, especially as we've seen the last 25 years play out in Russian history. But it's that difference that kind of brings us to this week's show. See, it was May Day this weekend, so that made it a really fitting time to talk with Darryl Cunningham about his new book, Billionaires. The book is a revised edition from Drawn and Quarterly, in which Darryl profiles Rupert Murdoch, the Koch brothers, and Jeff Bezos to explore how the ultra-wealthy got that way and how they've warped the world. And I'm talking politics, culture, the environment, labor, everything, in pursuit of wealth. So, in the course of the book, Darryl gives us not just their adult rapacious lives, but the experiences that helped shape them and the evolutions of the businesses they inherited or that they built. And Darryl's, he's a really gifted graphic nonfiction storyteller. This is graphic nonfiction, by the way. The whole thing is comic form. He conveys information while also carrying the reader along with this really deft balance of text and images. And you'll learn a lot and get infuriated by Billionaires. But it's not just a polemic against its subjects and the pursuit of wealth for its own sake. I mean, it's pretty condemnatory, but Darryl also does a good job humanizing the Kochs and Bezos, not ignoring some of the good things they've done with their wealth, nor the circumstances in which they grew up that may have helped shape some of their mindset. I mean, it's all outweighed by the costs to the world in terms of all those things I mentioned before, politics, labor, environment, and all that stuff. But they're not cartoon supervillains, which to me makes it a much more interesting read. That said, Rupert Murdoch is pretty unredeemable throughout, and there was a kicker of an ending to his chapter. But I should mention also, Murdoch comes up for an interesting anecdote in that Le Carré book, where literally the only thing he wants to know from Le Carré at lunch is who killed Robert Maxwell. You'll need to read the Pigeon Tunnel to find out his theory on that. Anyway, I mentioned that Billionaires is a revised edition. The book originally came out in the UK in late 2019, but Darryl's updated it for the North American edition to include some mid-2020 material on the pandemic and a little bit more illumination into the lives of the people that he's covering. It's a really gorgeous edition, too. The printing is wonderful. It really holds nicely as a book. Drawn and Quarterly's done a great job with it. But this is going to be me wandering off the reservation a little bit. As we talk about during the episode, and as I've gone on about during the past year, the public health emergency has reframed a lot of arguments about the roles of government and big business in people's lives. It's something that came up especially in the Kurt Anderson show I did last year, this decades-long push by the GOP for small government here in the U.S. We could see now the disastrous results of that when it comes to public health. I mean, a lot of people knew this was a bad idea to begin with, but we're really seeing it in the face of this crisis where things like the logistics of organizing vaccinations and even the very nature of caring about the health and well-being of other people is seen as a sign of weakness or something by a portion of the population. I'll say the general public, through the pandemic and what we've gone through here in the U.S., sees a lot more value in the government, A, just being competent, and B, taking a bigger role in building a safety net and not just jury-rigging together an infrastructure to respond to crises. That said, again, there's a significant portion of the population that is embracing disinformation or willfully adopting a version of selfishness that borders on the sociopathic as far as I'm concerned. But I digress. What I meant to say, and what we talk about in the show and what I've mentioned in the past, is that the pandemic led to the adoption of the term essential worker here and in other countries for the people we need and the quote-unquote frontline personnel. But once the bill comes due, we change essential to mean less we can't get by without you and need to treat you well, and more you need to keep working and fulfilling my needs. And I mean, it's predictable that we fell into that, but, in the UK, Darryl mentions that, NHS workers, now that they're starting to get past all this, the government decides they get a pittance of a raise rather than, the treatment they deserve for, again, being at the front of this whole situation. And as far as our ultra wealthy go, we get guys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos pumping money into colonizing Mars rather than trying to help fix this world. I don't know where I'm going with this. Sorry to go all over the goddamn place. But I like to believe that this country can reframe what, we the people means. And Billionaires, Darryl shows us that some of the problems we have in America are they're not local. They're not endemic to here. They finding a way forward is going to require a lot of work and a lot of courage from elected officials and others. And, the book shows us where things can go wrong and what the pursuit of wealth for its own sake, way beyond even dynastic figures, can do to the world. So I hope you give it a read. I hope it educates, inspires, and infuriates you. Now, as far as caveats go, we had a little recording problem, so the episode split in two parts. I hope you don't figure out where the part is. Here's Darryl's bio from Billionaires. Darryl Cunningham is the cartoonist of 5 nonfiction books, including Super Crash, How to Hijack the Global Economy, and Billionaires, now out in a revised edition from Drawn and Quarterly. His comics explore subjects as diverse as mental health, science, economics, and politics. Darryl has given talks at the London School of Economics and the City of Arts and Lights, Valencia. In 2015, he was one of 30 world-renowned photographers, painters, sculptors, writers, filmmakers, and musicians who were invited to contribute to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Art of Saving a Life project to promote vaccination in the developing world. In 2018, he was awarded an honorary degree of Master of Arts from Leeds Arts University. He lives in the UK. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Darryl Cunningham. Tell me about Billionaires and where it began for you, and this revised edition for North America, sort of what you've had to adjust or change in the intervening time.
It's a sort of sequel to a previous book I'd done called, over here in the UK it's called Super Crash, but in the US it's called Age of Selfishness, which I was writing it around 2008, and the banking crisis was happening then, and it was the biggest story around. And I like to sort of take on subjects that are little understood, not just by the general public, but myself as much as anything. So that book is sort of an explanation of the roots of the financial crisis, how we came to that point, and it had a sort of historical backdrop looking at free market libertarianism in America in the past, which led up to the sort of deregulation that led ultimately to the massive banking crisis we saw at that time. So Billionaires is sort of like an offshoot of that. And so I started to think about all those subjects again, and how the 1% in particular, the very richest people, have benefited. And I thought, I'd concentrate on that. And I particularly want to look, I had a short list of, let's say, 10 people or so that I was going to look at. It was going to be a less in-depth book at one point. But then I whittled it down to about 3. Rupert Murdoch, the Koch brothers, and Jeff Bezos and Amazon. And the reason I particularly picked those 3, because they didn't overlap so much, because I realised I wouldn't be telling the same story.
Sure.
So Murdoch, because he covers sort of the media, the Koch brothers because it's oil and gas, and Jeff Bezos, it's got retail and tech. So these things nicely complement one another, and they're obviously very powerful in their own areas. So I was able to talk about that. And as for updates to the book done for the D&Q, it's just a little bit about how the coronavirus, the epidemic has changed things since then, and a little bit more about how Amazon has changed in particular in terms of their workers' rights and stuff. Something that's very much in the news at the moment.
Sure. When you were whittling down that list, was there this is the one other person I really would have done or would have added a chapter for, that you just had to say, nah, otherwise this book goes way beyond the scope?
No, really. I mean, I was looking at people like Richard Branson and Elon Musk, but a lot of those things, themes would be covered by Jeff Bezos, I think. So I decided not to do those, really. If it was ever going to do a sequel, it'd be interesting to do a sequel on, because the thing is about all these big guys, they are guys. If you look at the Fortune 100, the top section of that is all white people, and white men, if that, and like the Koch brothers, often living off, started their fortunes on inherited wealth as well. So it'd be interesting to do like a book about people who've become billionaires, or are billionaires, who are like people of colour, or women are outside the usual white male thing. Really see how they've done it and what their lives are like, what their businesses are like. Yeah,
and whether they are quite as societally destructive as some of the people you've profiled already.
Oprah obviously comes to mind as a billionaire. I think she is a billionaire. Is that right? I think she is.
I think, yeah. What was the biggest challenge of the book, besides containing rage at certain of the aspects of the people you were writing about?
It's always the same. The biggest challenge is always whittling the information down because there's so vast amounts of stuff to read through. You have to really be selective. And obviously, it's only a certain number of pages. How are we going to fit it all in? It's sort of whittling it down, but still keeping the essential information there for people to read. So that is always a battle. It's a very selective, sifting process I have to go through to get to it. But the thing is, although it is a very difficult thing to do, I've done it so often now, I know how to do it. So that makes a difference.
Did you have any journalistic training, or is this sort of something you've developed in the course of the nonfiction and journalistic graphic novels you've done so far?
Well, no, I haven't. But what I have had,
because I'm with you, because I'm self-taught in almost everything I've done, including this. So I'm
not quite self-taught because I before I became a full-time cartoonist, I worked in mental health, and I was like an untrained nurse on a sort of psychiatric ward for many years, and then after a few years of this, I decided, I'm doing the job, I might as well train up for it. So I started a course to be a trained psychiatric nurse, and about 2 years into this course, I realized I was just completely burned out. I couldn't continue with it really. And but the thing is, one of the things that came out of that is that I learned how to write essays and research information and stuff. So that stood me in good stead because I just learned the basics of it there. Really, it's one of the things that came usefully out of that course, which otherwise was a failure.
Mm-hmm. Again, our failures can still teach us an
Absolutely.
awful lot.
I mean, I don't regret any of it. I learned so much. I learned what I didn't want to do, and I took a lot of. I learned a lot of. Well, it's difficult to explain, but I explain a lot of that. My first book, Psychiatric Tales, sort of covers this period, and not only explains a lot of stuff about mental health, but it has my own story threaded through it. So I was in that job quite in the end overwhelmed with like stress and became quite ill myself. So I learned a lot about myself and I have to sort of deal with very stressful situations as well.
Yeah, I remember Tom Spurgeon's shared Psychiatric Tales with me. It was a reader's copy. I remember he sent over to me way back. God, it's got to be over 15 years now, which is a sign we've been at this for quite a while, I guess. When you look back at earlier work of yours, do you see? Do you only see the failures, or do you see, the good things and the seeds of, how your work was progressing as a cartoonist and ultimately as a journalist?
I'm generally very happy when I look through older stuff, especially Psychiatric Tales stands up very well, I think. And my drawing has developed over the years. I think it's better than it was. I mean, it's brought with it. It's sort of it's a strange thing, but getting technically better also brought its own problems, which I can't hard to explain really. But I sort of reached a certain level, and I have to stay at that level, and I can't sort of go. I feel like I can go back easily. So, it's always people think, oh, well, you've learned to draw. That's it. No, it's never ending. It's always like writing generally, or any kind of creative. It's just everything is a problem-solving thing. Every new page is a problem to be solved. It's always like that.
Mm-hmm. Have you gotten better at identifying what those problems are over the course of doing this? Or, I mean, over the course of your career in comics?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know my limitations. I know what I shouldn't really do. I don't know really. I just take things as they come, really, and see what happens.
Yeah, I never want to make an artist self-conscious about their own process to the point at which they call me months later saying they haven't been able to do a single page since we talked. So don't worry about that. This just
Yeah, so much of it is like, you just, it's unconscious, I suppose, is the best word. I don't like that word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Almost, we could say intuitive, but there's still
Intuitive is
skill
better.
and craft.
Yeah, I think that's a better word.
Yeah. I only say this because I only recently took up drawing at the age of 50, and all I draw are the trees in my neighborhood. But just over the 2 months I've been doing it, I can now look at things and see what I would do to draw them, as opposed to when I started and was just trying to get lines on a piece of paper. So this is all very simplistic and not anywhere near what you do, but at least it's teaching me, after all my life of reading comics, to actually look at lines now and see why things are the way they are. So.
Well, trees are difficult. There's no doubt about it. Whether it's summer or winter, you've got different problems.
Well, that's my biggest thing. I've only been doing it during winter, and I'm dreading what happens when the leaves come in.
Yeah,
but
well, you can't draw. I tell you can't draw every week, every leaf. You have to,
yeah,
you have to really find a way of approximating the idea of a leaf, of a bunch of leaves. Really, it's. I tend to veer towards as simple as possible.
I was uptight about bark until I just looked at some pages by Seth and realized it's just a wavy line or two, and it gets the bark across to everybody just fine. But yeah, that's me on my side. Where did comics begin for you?
As a child, as many people do, as a child, I was reading British comics, the Beano and the Dandy and that kind of thing. So, and then eventually, I came across American comics. There was you could get imported comics here, very, not regularly. You could, if you wanted to get like a regular comic, like say I was reading Commandy when that came out, and there'd be months come by, and you wouldn't see one, and then you suddenly see one. It was very erratic. The market where I used to buy them. So, and then Marvel started to publish their own stuff over here, so that was great because I could buy it weekly then. That was great, and so I was very interested in superheroes and stuff from the very beginning, and that also eventually led me to sort of seeing more alternate stuff. I got a big sort of treasury, the Apex Treasury of US underground comics. Do you know that book? It's a very famous book. And I picked that up somewhere, and that blew my mind because I thought, oh, you don't have to do all this adventure stuff. You can actually draw anything you'd like. Isn't that incredible? And any subject is good for comics, I realised. So that's kind of how it started.
Were there particular cartoonists you glommed onto? I mean, who you felt kind of influenced by in terms of style, or was it more just the general theme of holy crap, it doesn't have to be superheroes?
There was a lot of people around who started in a sort of British small press around that time. Eddie Campbell particularly struck me because he was doing strips about working at a factory and stuff, like very ordinary stuff, and like going out drinking in clubs and pubs and meeting friends, and that very mirrored my own life. Well, I wasn't working in a factory, but I could see that sort of working class life there, and his strips seemed very simply drawn, and I thought, well, yes, I could achieve that, because I found out it's actually as easy as it looks.
So that's the great thing about it.
In my own way of doing things, but it's inspiration. That was the inspiration initially. People like him and others who were around in the sort of small press. Phil Elliott particularly stood out as well, and others.
And was it a small enough scene that you actually got to meet some of the people from your...
I did meet a lot of people. I didn't meet Eddie for years, but eventually I met him very briefly in Manchester, an event. And Phil I got to know quite well. he's still active, I think.
Yeah, I've recently got a Kickstartered book from Phil, so I'm glad he's still making stuff in addition to going through the archives.
He reprinted the Suttons again.
Yeah,
that's good.
And do you have the Paul Gravett nexus of all comics?
Oh yeah,
connection also, or
to Paul all the time. He seemed to be there, and certainly was. He sort of promoted my work very early on when he was doing Escape. I never quite got into Escape, but certainly Paul and his partner Pete to help to promote my work, and Ed Pinson, who was running sort of a small press fanzine network at the time called, was it Fast Fiction? Yeah, Fast Fiction. He was running that, and he's a very good cartoonist in his own right.
Do you see yourself sticking with the journalism mold for your work going forward,
like
or
to go back doing some fiction
stories?
And I've had ideas of that. Yeah, but it's very. I've gotten myself typecast. That's the problem. And publishers come to me and they just want more of the same, and they forget that I used to do fiction at one time. Although I very rarely do it, but I can do it, and would like to go back to it at some point. But it's just finding the massive ideas that I have something that will really work in a book form and would suit the style that I have to draw. Because there are many stories I think of and I think, well, it wouldn't really suit my drawing style. Really, that's the problem with that. Because I'd like to, because I have a fairly simple-ish style. But if I wanted to do a strip that was more sort of in a more realistic, illustrative style, then that's like beyond me, really, fortunately.
For working on something like that, would it essentially have to be doing it on spec, just personal project, seeing where it goes while you're balancing that with professional work as well as the journalism?
That's essentially what I tend to do. I mean, I'm just coming to the end of a big book where like a big theme book anyway, although it's shorter than Billionaires, which is about Putin and Russia. And I take on the big subject. And so I obviously have to make money. And there are other jobs coming in. So it's like what I have to do, sort of personal work. Then I'll have to.
Yeah, by day I'm a lobbyist for a weird part of the pharmaceutical industry, not the bad guys, but I get the balancing art and creative activities along with actually making a living. But as long as we haven't attacked the pharma industry, I feel pretty good over the course of our conversation. But tell me about the Putin book and where it began. I saw you mentioned on Patreon having just finished it in the last couple of weeks, I think.
We're in the brutal editing phase. I always find that very difficult, the editing, because it's just very time consuming, going over it and over it and over it. And sometimes painful, but it has to be done. You've just got to get through it. Well, where did it start? It almost started as a joke, really, because I after I finished Billionaires, I kept saying, "Oh, I'm going to do Putin next," but it was meant to sort of be as a joke. But I started to think, well, maybe I should do that, because what do we know about Putin exactly, about his background and his life and his childhood and all that stuff? What do we know about it? Nothing, really. I didn't know anything, so I was very interested to sort of read up. And there are lots of books about him, and there's all sort of official stuff as well, which you can take with a pinch of salt, really.
Sure.
But there is what we know. He grew up in St. Petersburg after the war. His parents survived the siege of St. Petersburg, almost starved to death. And so he lived quite poorly, and eventually somehow managed to.
And did you have to draw him with the shirtless on top of a horse iconic image?
Well, there was a lot. There's been quite a few books about his early life and stuff, so that there's enough information for me to get through on that. But so the book basically is, it does look at his life, but it's also a book as much about modern Russia as it is about him. It's about how the Russian Federation has developed since the fall of the Soviet Union, and how a very small group of ex-KGB people basically took over the entire country, headed by Vladimir Putin. And of course, no amount of trouble since, basically.
Tell me about your politics and where they began.
Well, I've always been sort of more centre-left, really, more sort of liberal base, basically, but not too far to the left. I mean, it's hard to say, but I mean, I said previously that I had someone come up to me at a book signing, asking me if billionaires would turn them into a communist, which is not very likely, because the thing is that although I'm very critical of the super wealthy, I'm not really that critical about capitalism. I don't feel there's anything wrong with capitalism, apart from the fact that it needs restructuring to serve as many people as possible, and not just be a place for the super wealthy to siphon off and wealth hoard as much as possible. So I can't really think of many countries that have basically, taken hold of the whole economy and done very well. I mean, a mixture of I'm very much a mixed economy guy. The state should do what it does well, and then business and enterprise should do what it does well, and the two should be mixed together, so we get the best of both worlds. So it's when you veer from to one side to the other too far, the things go disastrously wrong. I think you stay in the middle, and you're much better off. So that's, I think, that's where I tend to think economically, and I think socially, and I tend to think that way as well, that it's best for everybody, as many people as possible, if you sort of stick to the middle.
Yeah, I think we're, at least in the US, and I know UK has a different background, different history, and a different healthcare system. I think the pandemic has sort of created an atmosphere here of, hey, maybe it's not so bad when the government actually has an infrastructure in place and can help the public, which we've been on this weird Koch-driven, partly 50-year course of trying to eliminate. Now seeing that, when you get rid of all these things, you leave us open to horrendous disasters like what we're currently going through.
It's true. I mean, I see some fine signs of things finally starting to balance out in the US, although it's going to be a long struggle. Over here, quite the opposite has happened. If anything, the libertarian right has got themselves entrenched in government and the media, so it's very difficult to remove them. Really, the current government are way ahead in the polls, despite massive amounts of corruption and complete incompetence where the pandemic is concerned.
Yeah,
it's quite startling, really.
Yeah, there are. Until things got super hairy and we had to all kind of focus on our local situations as much as we ended up doing, seeing the contrasts in how US and UK were dealing early on were or markedly weird. I was recently for my day job on a gigantic global vaccine summit conference call with Matt Hancock, among other people. And it was, yeah. Well, what was interesting was there was in the back.
Darryl did his own corruption scandal.
Yeah. And I think it had already originated by then. But what was interesting, he was Zooming from home, and there was a bookcase behind him with a political cartoon framed sitting in on the bookshelf. And with Zoom, you couldn't tell too close what it was, but I did a screenshot, sent it to Martin Rosen, and just said, can you figure out who that is? And within 3 seconds, he wrote back, exactly who the cartoonist had to be based on color, panel shape, etc. So, Yeah, I guess they do pay attention to how they're portrayed in comics, some of these figures. But
politicians always do.
Yeah. Even when it's unflattering, they seem to want to, buy the original art and, put it on display. But
yeah, it suggests that people aren't being savagely satirical enough, really.
Yeah, that's all. Again, talking to Martin Rosen, you would think, some of his have been particularly vile, but he'd said, no, they still ask for, the originals of these horrible slavering images of themselves. But when you mentioned the reader who, was concerned should be turned into a communist, who's your ideal reader, or who's your reader in general? I've heard you mention in the past that people have said, this is the first graphic novel I've ever read when they refer to some of your earlier works. Do you have a consistent take on who reads your stuff or who you're trying to reach?
It depends on the book, really. Psychiatric Tales reached a lot of people who worked in mental health, and that pleased me that I had people, doctors and nurses writing to me, as well as people, obviously, that have been patients. And I have quite a few people working in teaching psychiatric nursing wrote to me saying that they were using it in their classes, and that really pleased me. So it depends on what the book is, really. Sometimes I know I'm not just reaching comics people. People are interested in comics, although obviously I want to reach them as well. But outside that, obviously I can reach people outside that group to others who would not normally pick up comic books, and that's all the better. I think if I can do two things, really. One, educate them on people on the subject at hand, let's say the economy, let's say in the case of billionaires or supercash, but also teach them that comics is a really good medium to read and for people to work in.
Yeah, have you done any teaching with comics?
No, a little bit here and there, but I really don't like teaching. Actually, I find I'm not very good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of those things that, you either find a fit for.
Not really, and I find it incredibly quite stressful, really.
Mm-hmm.
I'd much rather get up and do a talk in front of hundreds of people than teach a small class of 15 people.
Interesting. So we've talked about pandemic issues and, how our respective governments have dealt. How has your situation yourself been over the last year plus dealing with this whole thing?
In terms of how it's, because I've always worked on home, in that way it doesn't make any difference, really. Yeah. But in terms of, I've got all the issues to do with my family and relations. That's been quite difficult. My parents are sort of getting elderly and they needed support through this, and also because I was in a long-term relationship with my partner, and we were in different countries. That had to be resolved, and that was affected. Now we've resolved that now we're both in the same country, and in fact in the same apartment, which is great. So, but in some ways that actually worked out to happen, because it's odd. Suddenly we realised, we better sort this out for once and for all. So it sort of provoked us into sorting that out. So that was good.
And you can always just thank the pandemic or blame the pandemic, depending on.
Well, we can both thank it and blame it, I think.
Yeah. If there's any bickering over who does the dishes or something, you say, darn that pandemic. But, given the, I don't want to say pro-science, but the debunking work you've done in the past with some of the journalism, have you had to deal with anti-vaccine people and, trying to explain to them, at least in the current situation, that the vaccines are actually not going to turn you into a Bill Gates robot or anything weird. And
I do my best. I like to sort of push the correct information, basically, but I do my best for it. But I mean, I've come across people who didn't believe believed odd things. But I've learned when I did Science Tales, which is basically about misconceptions in science. I got a lot of animosity from people online. And so I've learned from them not to really engage too much with people who are deep into conspiracies, because they love nothing else but to get into an argument with you online and ruin your day. So I don't really argue with people about that online, because it's like a waste of time, really. But what I try to do is just try and push the right information across, hoping that it will have some effect. You'll get through eventually. It's the best you can do, because people have gone around down the sort of deep holes of conspiracy. They're very hard to budge from that. They have to bring themselves out of it. You can help by presenting the truth the best you can.
Have you? I know you've benefited from online exposure with your work. Do you engage, as far as social media goes, with kind of rolling out or talking about current stuff? I mean, I always enjoy your Patreon feed, but that's a more specialized model when it comes to networking.
Not as much as I used to do. When I was doing Science Tales, I was sort of it was before sort of Facebook and all that, so I had a blog, and the online response was sort of evenly split between people who were really believed what I was saying and was very thankful that I was doing the work that I was doing, and people who were viciously against me, basically. And I think the groups that were the worst, I think, were people who were into homeopathy and chiropractic. And I think that a lot of those people are very financially invested in those kind of beliefs, so it's very hard to move them from believing that stuff.
One of the and this takes us down a rabbit hole. One of the weirdest aspects of what we're going through, especially in the US, is the intersection of that sort of world along with the yoga self-improvement side and the whole Q conspiracy thing. Like, I don't know what it is that lends the homeopathic people, et cetera, into this weird global conspiracy mentality that truly is more imaginative than anything Stan Lee came up with in a lot of respects.
Well, I think that if you haven't learned critical thinking skills, you're always going to be vulnerable to these kind of wild ideas, especially if they're presented in such a way that, the truth over all these other people, these sheep who don't know. So it appeals to people's vanity, really, and that's how they get you, really. I always think it's when you're presented with information that you want to believe, that fit with your prejudices, that's when you should be most critical, not least critical, because that's how they get you. So that's my approach, really. When I see anything online and I think, that's really interesting, I believe that, immediately I pull myself and think, well, just a minute, is this really true? How can I check this?
Yeah,
I always have to at least check it 2 or 3 times in different places if you can. Even if it's sort of very innocuous things, just always be suspicious, really.
Yeah.
It's just a healthy place to be, really. It doesn't sound like it, but it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find that in general, the confirmation bias thing, I tend to look and that's too in line with exactly what I think. This has probably got some holes in it, but at the same time, I'm also given the knowledge I have about pharmaceuticals and manufacturing and all that stuff, it's almost physically painful not to correct somebody who has an incredibly ill-informed take on these things online. I have to realize if I do this, this is just going to open a floodgate of crazies out there. All of which goes to ask, speaking of which, are you ready for potential trolling, bots, backlash, etc., from publishing a book on Putin when that comes
I
out?
think it's going to come. I'm not sure really what's going to happen. I mean, I put out books before. I thought we're going to have a big splash, and then nothing. So you just don't know. I mean, the thing is, there are a lot of books out there on Putin and Russia already. It's not like um, it's alone. Like sticking my head above a parapet. There's plenty more, and in many ways, because it's a cartooning book, you're sort of flying below the radar. You miss out. A lot of missiles miss you because they don't pay attention to you, and that's good for me, really. But that's also bad because then you don't get the attention you should get, and you don't get the sales you should get, perhaps. But I don't know what it's going to be like. It'll be interesting to find out.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll all be positive, and that you'll get a wider audience without all the crazy bot farms in Ukraine and places like that. Writing mean stuff about you online.
So far, I've not come to their attention.
Yeah, but, we'll keep it that way.
If that happens, when that happens, I'll just pay no attention to it, basically.
Good move. Now, with billionaires, with the research and everything you did to write not just the biographies, but what their businesses are and how those interact or intersect with the world, what was the most appalling discoveries you made on each of your subjects? Not original reporting, but the things that I didn't even realize it was this bad with Rupert Murdoch or Bezos or the Kochs.
There is stuff that I really couldn't put in the books because I thought, this is litigious, this.
That's true. In England, you have much harsher.
There is that. I have to be careful of that, really. But with Bezos, even to some extent the Koch brothers, you can find aspects of them which especially Bezos, you can find, despite the despicable way that he treats a lot of his workers and so on, there's something quite admirable about the way he built up his business. To have that kind of energy is an incredibly inspirational, really, the way that he basically pulled that together almost from nothing, really. He's not like a lot of the other billionaires I was looking at, didn't make in the book, who inherit. I mean, Murdoch, he always likes to make out that he's a self-made man, but he didn't. He inherited money from his father. But Bezos didn't inherit any money. His stepfather, was a penniless Cuban who came across to Florida and then trained himself up to become a guy working in middle management in the oil industry. So he got into the middle class that way. So Bezos comes from a middle class background, but he's just one generation away from penniless, really. And so he then, because he was incredibly smart, managed to sort of build this business from a garage. Originally he started, and reading that story is incredible, really. But as for Murdoch, he's actually worse than I imagined. His despicable attitude to his workers, the racism, the sexism, it's just so absolutely appalling. It's hard to find anything good to say about him at all. Even his mother told him off. His mother at the end of the book saying, "Oh, well, it's not how much money you make, it's what you do with that money that makes you a great person."
Yeah. And just leaving that ambiguous enough. But yeah, that was a great end to the Murdoch chapter. But yeah, it was something. I was glad to hear you say that about Bezos because, yes, the treatment of workers is absolutely deplorable, and it's been, this ties back into pandemic life where, once again, here in the U.S., as somebody put it, at the height of this disaster, they were essential and frontline, and now they're low-skilled and unskilled workers. We called them essential when we needed them to deliver all of our stuff, but now that we're in a position to raise their wages and everything else, they're unskilled workers. We find a way to treat labor
the same thing's happened here, basically. I mean, the NHS nurses are not going to get the pay rise.
Oh, yeah.
Best they'll get 1%, which is not a pay rise really at all.
Yeah. But yeah, with what you said about Bezos, what I appreciated about building Amazon the way he did, and it's something you get into in the book, is how it wasn't necessarily a let's maximize shareholder value thing from the beginning. Because you and I are old enough to have seen how this all evolved. I remember the years that the analysts were ridiculing him. You can't turn a profit with this business model. You're investing all of this money in warehouses. This is insane. And then, it turned into the model for, all of e-commerce basically, and the backdrop for how everybody, traffics their web services. It's been interesting to see that evolution, and as you put it, how different that is from the other types of billionaires and other types of industries that you profile within this book, and the things we've seen historically. Which less of a question than a comment, but that's the world we're in. So, what comes after Putin?
I'm working on a piece that was commissioned by Warwick University. They've been doing some research on the NHS and basically what the public's perception of the NHS. So they've got a mass of information and interviews with people of all ages, of the experiences of not just being patients within the NHS, but staff working in the NHS. So they wanted to take some of that research and turn it into a comic strip. So I'm working on that, and that will keep me busy for a month or two. Then after that, I'm going to go back to, as I say, I'm going to attempt to do like a fiction project. But what this fiction project is, I'm really not quite sure. But I'd really like to do that for like a year maybe, and then come back again and do a non-fiction book. But again, I don't know what that subject will be. The trouble is that I've sort of set myself up to do sort of bigger, almost like bigger and bigger subjects each time. There's nothing much bigger than Putin and Russia. What would I do above that? I mean, people probably just encourage me over and over again to do two subjects, which I've really tried to avoid doing. And one was Brexit, and the other one was Trump. I just didn't want to do those, and I still don't want to do that. I don't think I would enjoy doing those subjects, really. So
I'm glad you said that, because I was afraid those were going to be the directions you went next, and those are they're admirable projects. But
do something which at least touches on those. You can't really avoid them. Take a political subject in the world today, then sooner or later overlaps with those things.
Yeah. But maybe there's a smaller scenario or something. One of the questions I had, flashing back to Psychiatric Tales and your work, the voice of the narrator, sort of how that evolved for you, how you speak to the reader, whether it's, a semi first person or more, informational voice, how did you evolve in that mode of storytelling, or, become more confident with a certain type of voice?
Oh, well, it was interesting how that developed, really, because in Psychiatric Tales, because I'm part of that story, I have myself speaking, and you see myself speaking, I draw myself, and then I carried that over into Science Tales, sort of, you see me as a sort of on-the-page narrator. But then after that, I thought, well, why am I doing it that way? I mean, it became sort of a lazy kind of cliche. So every time I couldn't think of anything to draw, I would just draw myself speaking. And I thought, well, I can do better than that. It's like in old videos of old when the director couldn't think of anything to visualize, he'd just cut to the drummer. It was that kind of thing. So I thought I'd cut out that and just have my voice, really. But now I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll bring myself physically back into the story. So I'll do a subject where I can just actually appear on the page again, especially if it was more personal. So, I wouldn't write that off entirely. I might just bring that back. It'd be interesting. After all this time, it'd be interesting technique, I think.
Yeah, I wondered about it just, along those lines. And that sort of gets into what did you learn about storytelling? Even how do you learn to convey information without dumping it all on the reader? And I think
the beauty of comics is you've got two parallel, ways of informing the reader. You've got the text and you've got the pictures. And what you try not to do is to, like, say, you've got like drawing a guy getting on a bus. There's a little point in putting in if you're drawing that, there's a little point in the text saying, "Oh, then the guy got on the bus," because you can see it. So you're getting the two bits of information the same way. You have to have something that counterpoints that. And one of the biggest struggles I have sometimes is often on pages is like, what image goes with this? That isn't just what I'm saying in the text. So that I often struggle with that. But it's interesting what you can come up with sometimes. So, I find that fascinating that you can counterpoint these things against one another.
It's, especially for this type of comics, it's really, you have to be very inventive along those lines in terms of developing images to offset, what's there in the text. Thing you hate drawing the most?
The thing I keep drawing the most? Oh, it used to be cityscapes. I'm not sure what it is now, really. Too many people. I mean, one of the problems of having, if you're quoting, because I do non-fiction, therefore, I often quote people. And wherever possible, I have a technique where I get people to speak in their own words whenever I can. If I can get them, find a quote and I'm saying it, then I get them to say it. And that means I have to draw them. So there is a tendency, a bit, for there to be a lot of talking heads. But there's almost no way of avoiding it. But I do try to break up pages the best way I can. So you're not just the reader isn't just presented with, panels and panels of talking heads. So I try to do other things. But that is a problem that's there.
Yeah. And do you hate drawing Rupert Murdoch's face?
It's an interesting face, you've got to say. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm flipping through pages of it now and just looking at how it's changed from his
youth. Right. I mean, one of the problems I have is that I'm not I struggle with likenesses. You may say, oh, it's all right. But I can, some people can draw quite well and other people, they can vary from page to page. But if I can at least the reader is sure who it is, then it doesn't really matter too much. But I do wish my portrait skills were a little better than they were.
So, since you're in the UK, and my mother's British, she was born in Golders Green, 1940, came over to Israel and then the US. So I've gone back over the years, as well as visiting for doing podcasts when I've had business travel in Europe. The Prince Philip thing, in the U.S., there's either the royal watchers or people who totally don't get it, or antipathetic towards it. In fact, a British cartoonist almost threatened to lambaste me and quit subscribing to my weekly email because he thought I was some sort of pro royalty guy. How is it locally or domestically, the sort of weird pageantry and ceremony behind something like this?
I'm shaking my head in disbelief. You can't see it, but like the BBC basically abandoned all their programs for simultaneous broadcasting of the same program, and they got more complaints about. They had to set up a special website, which then failed because they had so many complaints about it. Because all right, show some deference to a dead person, but it's like the crazy sycophancy was really awful. It shows this country at its worst, I think. For my own personal view is that it's long past time we were a republic, a democratic republic, without any of this, dog and pony show we have over us. We should be citizens of our own country, not subjects. So much it's all part of the entrenched class system, which seems to have come back again in the past 10 years or so, worse than ever in some ways.
Yeah, how do you contrast that?
It,
oh, go on. I'm sorry.
Go on. Yeah, I'm against it.
Good. Yeah, how do you contrast from the times you've visited America, and you've mentioned your partner is from New York? I don't know if she's British and just living there, or whatever her history is, or that person's.
She's Texan.
Okay, so how do you contrast U.S. and UK when it comes to class and other social issues from your experience so far? Which I know, again, horrendously broad question, but
it's very hard to say about the US because it's so big, and from state to state, it feels very different. It's more like a bunch of countries, really. Yeah. That sort of fooled into thinking there's an actual one country. But so it's very, very difficult to get. I mean, New York is very different from Texas, and so it's I find it hard to grasp, really. I have no real answer to it, but I think it's more. There's less of a class system. What there is, obviously, is a money system,
yeah,
which entrenches certain families into wealth, and that is you've got to do something about that.
Yeah, but not quite as severe or repressive as what you've got in the UK. Or just repressive in its own way, I guess.
It's a different approach, I think.
Yeah.
I think both countries could do better.
And when it comes to comics, do you have any time even to keep up with your peers, or is most of your reading really done with research for the projects you're
I'm afraid it is. I mean, whatever project I'm working on, that's what I have to read about, and I do. I do read all the stuff for pleasure, but not much of it is comics anymore, and it's a shame, really, that I know I'm missing out on some really good stuff that's out there. But when we have comic conventions again and stuff like that, I hope to sort of pick up a few things, see what's happening. So at the moment, I'm sort of like all of us, we're sort of out of this. The scene is sort of. It's hard to know what's going on, really.
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned a few episodes ago, I managed to miss 2 issues of Love and Rockets because there were no festivals to go to in the past year. And so I was never at a Fantagraphics table seeing a new issue of L&R. And it was one of those, oh, yeah, I guess if you're not going around to these scenes, you have to actively go out and pursue this stuff otherwise. So.
I'm really looking forward eventually to going back and seeing what people are doing, seeing what my friends are doing, seeing what people whose work I admire, what they're doing. So yeah, I've really missed that.
And con or festival or not, place you want to travel once we're safely able to travel again?
I'd really like to go back to New York again, just for a little while, because I was meant to go back a year ago, last spring, and couldn't go, and just didn't happen. So maybe we can meet up in person one day.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I live 25 miles away from New York City, and every time you leave my town, you could see the entire New York skyline in the distance. And it has been now 13 plus months. And I'm just like, I just got my second dose of vaccine last week. So I'm like, someday I will be back in. But
well, it'll happen.
Yeah, I'm already figuring out, I'll go to the Frick, I'll go to the Met, I'll start getting around to the museums again and the Society of Illustrators and trying to figure out what you can do safely and put it all together. But yeah, it's my hope is we will get to meet in person next time you're over here. But my real question, though, is, are you ready to become an Instagram star on Drawn and Quarterly's feed when you celebrate the publication of Billionaires?
Not at all, but I will do it. I'm there to convince me that it was a good idea. But yeah, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, I've never done a live video thing like that. I just have no idea how, anything would translate. Although I have this vision of you getting seduced by that whole model and becoming one of those like video gamers who's streaming his own games, and building this gigantic audience. It could be a new career for you, is all I'm saying, Darryl. That's
I occasionally think that it'd be interesting to start to shoot small films and stuff like that. So I'm starting to think in that way. But the trouble is you need to sort of book in the time, if you like, to learn a whole new thing, and that's very time consuming. And time is a thing that I don't have a lot of often. But maybe after I finish this book that I'm finishing now, I'll have a little bit of time to learn these other things I need to learn.
Yeah. And like you said, every one of those skills, you have to keep practicing. Anything like that you build up, you still have to do the reps just to maintain what you've picked up before. So,
yeah, that's true. Well, you always develop. It's an endless thing that you can learn, drawing and writing.
Yeah. In fact, I'm looking out my window at a couple of trees right now, thinking maybe I'll get out there and draw some of those guys later today, but we'll see. Meanwhile, Darryl, thanks so much for coming on the show. And, I'll be foisting off billionaires on some friends of mine because I think it will speak very well to the moment that we're in and sort of the inflection point, especially here in America with, well, like I said, how, we consider certain people to be essential until we don't consider them essential when we actually have to pay. So here's hoping for change.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me. It's been lovely to chat with you. Hopefully we can chat in person one day.
Thanks, Darryl. Looking forward to it. And that was Darryl Cunningham. Billionaires is out now in North America from Drawn and Quarterly, just a little past May Day. Go find it at your favorite bookstore or comic shop. Like I said, you may get infuriated, but you'll also learn a lot and, I hope, get inspired to push for change. Now, you can follow Darryl on Twitter at AcmeDarryl, on Instagram at Darryl.Cunningham, but most importantly, you can support his work via Patreon at AcmeDarryl. That is AcmeDarryl. I'll have links to all of this in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, you can support this podcast by telling people about it. You can also send me postcards, letters, emails, or leave me a message on my Google Voice number to tell me what you like and don't like about the podcast and who you'd like to hear me record with or what movie or TV show or book or music or comic or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. The Google Voice number is 973-869-9659. I do not receive those calls directly. I just get told there's a message, and messages can only be 3 minutes long, so you can leave multiple ones if you want. But it's kind of neat. And if it's something that you want me to share on an episode, let me know in the message or email me after, and I'll see about including it. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I'm not a billionaire, but I don't need your cash. My day job is treating me just fine. My expenses are way down, although I do have to start looking at going back into New York to record podcasts, but that's a separate thing. I hope you'll support other people or institutions that are in need. For individuals, you can find them through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, etc. If you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, GoFundMe also helps there, but you should look to your local food bank, the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, various health funds, all those things that are working towards helping us build a better world. So if you can help, I hope you will. Also, I still have some copies left of the first issue of my first zine, Haiku for Business Travelers. If you want one, just drop me a line or visit haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and hit me up that way. It's free. You can kick in a few bucks for postage and production if you want, but this is not a money-making thing. It's just me sharing my art, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.